Hello and welcome to a deeper dive with me, Dara Cam. We have a really exciting lineup for you this week. We are celebrating Black History Month. And to do that, we have with us two state legislators. We have State Senator Geraldine Thompson, a Windermere Democrat, who will tell us so much about Black history and share some of her lived experience with us. And we also have another generation of Black leaders. We have State Rep Michele Rayner, who comes from a long legacy of African American trailblazers, and you'll get to hear some of her lived experiences.
You're listening to A Deeper Dive with Dara, a podcast by the News Service of Florida.
Hello and welcome to A Deeper Dive with me, Dara Cam. You can hear me smiling right now because I'm super excited to have with me in the Terracotta Room, that's right, live here in person, to celebrate Black History Month, a special guest, Senator Geraldine Thompson. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy legislative schedule.
I am glad to be here.
And so we are going to talk about Black History Month, and Senator Thompson is one of the perfect people to discuss this recognition with, because I remember Senator Thompson was first elected to the House in 2006. She served there until 2012, when she went to the Florida Senate, where she served until 2016. Then she couldn't quit us, and she came back to the House in 2018, where she served until 2022, when she was elected to the Florida Senate. So you've done a round robin on both sides of the rotunda, as we say here in Tallahassee. And I remember when I was working for the Palm Beach Post back in the day, when you were in the Florida Senate, when you would do first person, not a reenactment, but you were a storyteller.
Yes, I would portray African American women
Yes.
who were significant in the history of Florida.
Yes. And we were just reminiscing about some of the women that Senator Thompson highlighted, and one of them was Zora Neale Hurston, and we all know Zora Neale Hurston. Let's talk a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into the basics of why Black History Month is so important.
Well, I remember when I was in high school and when I was in college, we didn't learn the history of women. We didn't learn the history of African Americans. If you were interested, that's research that you had to do yourself. And so it became very important to me to make sure that going forward, that people knew about the contributions of African Americans and women and other individuals who generally are not included in our textbooks. And so that's my interest in African American history. But before I was elected to the legislature, I worked in the legislature. And many people probably are not aware that I came to the legislature in 1970 as executive secretary to Gwendolyn Sawyer Cherry. And Gwendolyn Sawyer Cherry was the first African American woman ever elected to the Florida legislature. She was from Miami, and Miami is where I grew up. And,
I did not know that.
Yes, she was a teacher and decided she wanted to become a lawyer. So she enrolled in law school at the University of Miami, but then transferred to Florida A&M University, and later taught at the law school at Florida A&M University. And when she won election to the Florida House of Representatives, I was recommended for her secretary, and I came here with her in 1970.
Wow.
And the aide, you have two staff members. The aide was John Marks, He was in law school at the time.
John Marks, who later became the mayor of Tallahassee.
Exactly. So this is the kind of history that's important, that's not documented and not shared. And so I worked for Gwendolyn Sawyer Cherry.
Wow.
And, she served from 1970 to 1979 and unfortunately was involved in a tragic accident here in Tallahassee.
She's not even really a name that most people would recognize nowadays as the first female black legislator.
And we've got to change that.
Yeah.
And there was a special election after her death, and she was succeeded in the legislature by Carrie Patterson Meek.
Of course, we all know Carrie Meek, right?
Yes. And so Carrie Meek replaced her in the House, and Carrie served in the House and then ran for the Senate and was the first African-American female elected to the Florida Senate.
Wow. Thank you. See, this is why we're celebrating Black History Month. We just learned some history right now. This is terrific. And I didn't know that you've seen a lot of changes in the legislature since 1970.
And if you can imagine, she was the only African-American woman in the Florida legislature. And John Marks and we were her staff. So there was almost no diversity.
I would imagine there weren't a lot of black aides other than you two.
Well, Representative Joe Lane Kershaw had been elected to the Florida House in 1968.
Okay.
And
so he was an African American.
He was an African American.
Man. Okay.
So you had the two elected
wow.
members and their staff in terms of the entire Florida legislature.
Wow.
And because Gwendolyn Sawyer Cherry was African American, she was perceived by African Americans throughout the state of Florida to be their representative. If they lived in Pensacola, they called Gwendolyn Sawyer Cherry for whatever their concerns were. So she was torn in so many different directions. And her background is interesting in that she was the daughter of one of the first African American physicians in Dade County. And so she grew up in a privileged background.
Right.
And could have chosen to be a socialite and to go to galas and stay home and bake cookies. But she chose to spend her time and to give her talents to serving people in the state of Florida.
Being a trailblazer.
Yes.
So some of what you were just telling us kind of demonstrates why Black History Month is important, the significance of knowing who the trailblazers were and what obstacles they faced and what they overcame and what they achieved. What are some of the most significant lessons that need to be addressed this month?
Well, I think that the more we know about each other, the more we can appreciate each other. And the greater appreciation you have, the greater cohesiveness you have. And so that's why it's so important. But you mentioned some of the challenges. And I talked about Carrie Patterson Meek. And after 1990 and the 1990 census, Carrie Meek was a plaintiff in a lawsuit to require that the state of Florida draw fair district lines for representation in Congress.
Gosh, it's deja vu all over again, isn't it?
Yes, we're still here. And so Carrie P. Meek, based on that lawsuit, became the first African American from Florida post-Reconstruction to be a member of Congress. And so she left Florida in 1992 after she was elected and went to Washington, D.C., where she was joined by two other African Americans after the lines were redrawn, and that was Alcee Hastings and Corrine Brown.
Right. Well, we could get into the controversy over Al Lawson's seat, the old Corrine Brown seat, later, but there's some other things I'd like to talk to you about. Maybe we need to do a whole redistricting episode. But we were talking about what were some of the most significant lessons that we need to be talking about during Black History Month. What are you at the top of your
I think
list?
the biggest lesson is that one person can make a difference. And we saw that with Rosa Parks. She was one person. However, there were so many people who had been treated in the same way that she had been treated that it sparked a whole movement of other people standing up. And I've heard that Rosa Parks sat down so that we could stand up.
I've heard
And
that.
one person can make a difference. Carrie P. Meek made a difference. Gwendolyn Sawyer Cherry made a difference. And those of us, African Americans who serve in the legislature today, we understand clearly that we stand on the shoulders of those pioneers who came before us. They were forerunners in this fight. And sometimes being in a super minority, you wonder if you're moving the needle at all. And I've come to realize that you can't win unless you stay in the fight. And so that's why I continue my service in the legislature.
Sure, because back in 1970, Democrats were in the majority. Right. But I want to follow up on something that you said. You can't win unless you stay in the fight, but you can't move the needle really unless you're in the fight. There's a lot going on right now. I always say this, and my listeners will get bored hearing me say it again, but I love when my guests feed naturally into the questions that I have on my screen in front of me. We live in a politically charged climate, and we're going into a presidential election. There have been some changes made at the state level regarding education and African American history. I'd like to talk to you about that because you are an educator. That tends to increase this election year, the kind of political climate we're in right now. Tensions are high. So what concerns do you have with your life experience about the way that we are treating each other?
We are very polarized. There are a lot of divisions, and it is not healthy for our democracy. It's not good for our country. And some of the gains that I saw that have been made are being eroded. And the notion that you would introduce teaching standards that suggest that there were benefits to slavery is unbelievable. The reality is that people were brought to the American colonies from the continent of Africa because they had certain skills. They were skilled in ironworking. They worked with textiles. They were part of developing mathematics and engineering. And so to suggest that African Americans came to the American colonies and developed skills that they could use for their own personal benefit is really insulting. And part of the reason that occurs is because we don't know a whole lot about Africa before the conflicts that led to slavery. So you need to start there. And then you understand that you don't cross the Atlantic Ocean, go halfway around the world to bring people to the colonies if you think that they are unintelligent, if they are weak, if they are, all of the negative things that we've been told, it just isn't true, because when the slave masters looked at who they wanted to bring, they looked for the strong, they looked for those who were agile, and they looked for intelligent people.
Right.
Otherwise, it would make no sense.
Well, they wanted the most high value people who could benefit them in some way.
Without question.
Yeah.
And then in the middle passage.
And I don't mean to say high value in a, it makes me cringe to say that, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yes. They were merchandise,
Right.
and so when you say high value, that is an accurate term, because during the Middle Passage there were people who were so traumatized that they jumped over the ship and died.
Right.
But then there were some who chose to survive.
It was
So
really
those,
survival of the
yes,
fittest.
so those who came here were the strongest of the strong.
Right. In addition to all the diseases that the
Yes.
white people brought over and whatnot. And, you know, there were very successful, thriving communities in Africa that the people who were enslaved were torn away from. So I think that's something that we aren't taught in schools
if you
either.
look at some of the ills that are prevalent in Africa, it's because the greatest resource that that country had was taken, and that was the people. And it was the young people who were brought. It was the women of childbearing age that were brought. So the old, the weak, the infirm, the fuzzy
mentally,
yeah,
right,
they were left behind.
right.
So you started with a selection of people who were valued because of their strength, their intelligence, etc.
So really, the cream of the crop.
Yes.
Part of what you're doing too, or what you've done, is you founded. Well, let's finish up with this discussion about education, because I was surprised while I was Googling before you got here that you served as the chair of the African American History Task Force. Am I right about that, or am I wrong about that?
I am serving as chair of a task force that was established based on legislation passed in the last session.
Right.
That is charged to recommend the creation of a state African American history museum, similar to the National Museum in Washington, D.C.
Oh, okay. Not a curriculum then.
No. And there are 9 members of the task force, 3 appointed by the governor, 3 by the president of the Senate, 3 by the Speaker of the House. I'm an appointee of President Pasadomo. And then among the task force, they select their chair. And I was selected chair. I have a long-standing history of involvement, documentation, sharing African American history. So I'm serving as chair of that task force now.
Okay, and that's still ongoing, because I was
is.
looking on their website and I didn't see anything posted recently, so I was a little confused. I apologize about that. And in the meantime, you also founded, I believe, the Wells-built Museum of African American History and Culture.
I did indeed.
That was a good little plug there.
Yeah,
I got it out.
Yeah, one of the things that I feel most blessed to have been able to do. The museum is in a building that was formerly opened as a hotel in Orlando in 1929. And it is just west of the railroad tracks. And historically, throughout the South, the railroad tracks separated the black community.
I grew up in Hollywood, Florida. Dixie Highway, the railroad tracks, was the dividing line between where white people and black people lived. It was literally the other side of the tracks.
So it's a historic building.
Sure.
And it was the property of there were only 2 African Americans physicians in Orlando in the 1920s. And Dr. William Monroe Wells graduated from Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. He graduated in 1914, came to Orlando in 1917. And the year after he came, the influenza epidemic hit the world, and there were only 2 African American physicians available to care for the African American community at a time when white physicians did not treat black patients. So the challenges were extreme, but he garnered great wealth because he was only one of 2, and he opened a performance hall called the South Street Casino, and he booked big bands Count Basie.
Oh, that's
Duke
my
Ellington.
favorite kind of music.
Yes.
I love big band music.
And so when they finished performing at the South Street Casino, they had no place to stay. So he built the hotel.
Right.
And it had 20 rooms. It's a two-story building. And the performance hall, unfortunately, suffered a fire. And it was torn down because it was never repaired. But the museum, the hotel was still there. And I founded a nonprofit group, and we restored it and opened it in 2001. It had been boarded up and abandoned for over 25 years. And we opened as the Wells Built Museum. It's named for the physician Wells.
Dr. Wells.
Dr. Wells. So we opened the museum in 2001, and we have celebrated 23 years of operation.
Well, let me... Oh, no, wait, wrong one. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Let's talk about some of the recent changes advocated by Governor DeSantis and Republican leaders about how Black history can be taught and racism can be taught in schools. What do you think about the restrictions that I don't have the language right in front of me, but you basically can't be taught in a way that makes people feel guilt or shame about whatever race they are? And I saw something, in fact, I texted it to myself because I wanted to remember it, where there was some parent posted something on Twitter. There's been stories written about it from Miami-Dade County that their child had to get a permission slip to listen to a book written by an African American.
Dr. Marvin Dunn.
Yes.
Yes. I think it's an effort to deny where we've been. And there's no way you can celebrate the progress that we've made or where we are without acknowledging where we've been. And so when you say that you can't discuss race in the classroom, that makes people feel uncomfortable, which people? Are they people like me who never saw myself in a textbook, never part of the curriculum, not in anybody's lesson plans? So let's be honest about the people that you're talking about. You don't want the white students to feel uncomfortable, but it's also the African American student who needs to be considered, and whether or not they feel uncomfortable by being rendered invisible. So it's an effort to just deny who we have been. And I think until we can accept who we are, who we have been, we really can't make progress, because we're spending a lot of time now saying that you can't use state funds on any initiative related to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right. I was going to ask you, again, you're feeding into, but yes, talk about that. Why is that important? Or why is it important to be able to talk about those things?
Well, if you believe that this is just accidental, you don't know our history. For example, the University of Florida was established in 1858. And so for a century, 100 years, there was not a single African American student at the University of Florida. Mm-hmm. Even though African Americans were required to pay taxes just like everybody else that went toward the support of this public institution of higher education, until George Stark was admitted to the University of Florida in 1958, there had not been a single African American student. Now, can you say that there wasn't a system of exclusion there, or maybe it was just happenstance? So the intent is not to acknowledge systemic racism or sexism, and just to say, everything has been fantastic for everybody, and that just isn't the case.
I mean, one of the things that I've discussed this at great length with some of my friends and some scholars like yourself, I think that comes from a place of making an assumption that we live in a post-racial society, that, we're all done with that. That's like, it ain't a thing no more. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
I absolutely know what you mean. When President Barack Obama was elected, people said race isn't an issue
right.
anymore. We're now post-racial, and we still live in a society where race matters.
Of course it does.
It matters, and even I have had experiences. I think I shared with you here in Tallahassee, taking my car to a dealership to have the car service and to be provided a shuttle. I was asked by the driver where I wanted to go, and I said I want to go to the Capitol. And he's driving, and he asked, well, who do you work for?
I remember you telling me this.
Who do you work for at the Capitol? So the image that we have of people, the stereotypes, all of those things are still
There was a black lawmaker was pulled over when he was driving, and this was not all that long ago. It was several years ago, but he was driving home from Tallahassee to Jacksonville, and he got pulled over because he had legislator license plates, and the highway trooper, didn't believe him that it was his car.
It's still a problem. And I shared.
I mean, we're laughing about it, but really.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you have to laugh to keep from crying. And I shared with people, I was on a panel this weekend in the district, that my husband was appointed as a judge by Reuben Askew in 1976.
Wow.
When he was appointed, I got an invitation on linen paper with embossed letters to a reception for the judges' wives. That's what it was called, because there were no female judges at the time.
Right.
And so I debated internally whether I was going to attend.
Why? Because you thought you would be the only black woman?
That is it. I thought that in all likelihood, except for perhaps the janitor and the cook, I would be the only person like myself there. And I didn't know if the other wives would be friendly, if I'd be excluded. So I had to wrestle with where I was going to go. I made up my mind, okay, he's new in this position. I want to be supportive, and I'm going. And then I got a phone call when I sent my RSVP in, and I was asked if I knew that the event was going to be held at the Orlando Country Club. And I said, I read the invitation, and yes, I saw that. And they said, are you going? I said, yes, I'm going. Later, I got another call asking me if I was aware that the Orlando Country Club had a policy of no Jews, no blacks, and no dogs.
1976.
1976. We are 2 decades after Brown v. Board.
Wow.
We're a decade after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And here is this institution that has a policy. Well, I had to talk myself into going, but when I heard about the policy, I was absolutely
Hell yeah. Right?
Yes. So when people learned that I was coming, they didn't quite know what to do, because I was absolutely going. And I got a call from one of the judges' wives, a white female, who said, I understand that you're going to go to the reception. And I said, yes, absolutely, I'm going. She said, well, I'd like to pick you up. And I want us to drive in together, because if you go by yourself, you will likely be arrested. And if they arrest you, they will have to arrest me at the same time. So here is someone who had nothing to gain and probably something to lose, but who saw the injustice of this. Like Dr. King says that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So this white female decided to take up this cause. And when people learned that we were coming together and had invited members of the media to come with us. The event was moved from the Orlando Country Club to a private home. So it hasn't been that long ago. It's not ancient. It's not ancient history. So no, we don't live in a post-racial society.
Is it personally hurtful to you when you hear these, when you see this kind of legislation and you see these kinds of efforts? As somebody who, that experience that you just shared with me literally gave me chills. How do you feel when you're hearing these debates and you're watching these policy changes?
Well, I am angry. I am wounded because I've devoted my life to breaking down these kind of barriers. That's what I've done. And then to see the barriers being erected again, it is hurtful. And I have 4 granddaughters. Actually, now I have 6. I forgot. My youngest daughter has 22-month-old identical twin girls.
Oh my goodness.
So I have 6 granddaughters, little black babies. And I want them to have a better world. I want them to live in a different kind of society. I don't want them to have the kind of experiences that I had. And so my personal feeling is that I stay in the fight for them so that they won't have to live the kind of life that I did. And I've succeeded not because of what I was exposed to here, but in spite of. And so I want them to be able to say that they're doing well because of. I have 2 granddaughters who all went to Florida schools. University of Florida, Florida A&M University. I have one who is a lawyer like her granddad. She went to Florida State University. The other 2 are now in college, and they chose to go outside of the state of Florida because of the environment that has been created here. They want to be in an environment where they feel valued, where they feel welcome. One is at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and the other is at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland. And they just said, well, why would I want to be in Florida? So we're having students making those kind of calculations in addition to professors. When we're looking for faculty, they know that Florida has a law that allows students to tape their professors without their knowledge and consent. And the professor's tenure can be reviewed at any time, not just every 5 years. You have the anti-DEI, you have the
critical race theory, and
all of this.
It's not just the to some extent there, I don't think, I have a friend of mine who's always warning me that I'm straying too far to the left when I'm in some of my discussions with my guests, but I don't think it's Dara opining to say that some of the state leaders have demonized critical race theory. I think that's just a fact, right?
It is, and the shame here is that critical race theory was never taught in our K-12 system.
Right.
So you've demonized something and you have outlawed something that has not happened. So I guess this is a preemptive strike. I don't know. But critical race theory was a graduate level course generally taught in graduate school and in law school. And it did look at the system that I talked about and is race part of that? And does race have any bearing on what we find in education, what we find in the criminal justice system? What we find in banking, mass incarceration, right. You name it.
Yeah.
And so it's demonizing something that we really need to be examining very critically and deciding how we move in a different direction that values all of us.
Let me ask you, you've been in the state legislature for a minute, and there's a lot of talk. We're in a presidential election year, as I said earlier. There's been a lot of talk among Democrats for years and among Black leaders that that Dems have taken Black voters for granted, and that the Democrats aren't doing enough to court Black voters. And that Black voters are critical for in national elections for a Democrat to win. Do you think President Biden is doing enough to reach out to Black voters to get reelected in November?
Well, I think sometimes Black voters are taken for granted, that we're going to be the loyal part of the party that's always going to be there. And I watched the kind of money that was allocated to reach certain populations. A great deal of money spent to reach the Hispanic population, which is very important, which has grown considerably, but it's a population that doesn't turn out to vote. Black people turn out to vote, but you don't see the money being spent on ads, Black radio, Black events, those kinds of things. And we've got to examine that. And you can't take your most loyal people in the party for granted.
Well, this is Black History Month. You gave us a little of your history in Florida, and I would like you to share give us a lesson in some Florida Black history. Maybe you want to do a little bit of, and I'm taking you by surprise maybe, but tell us a little bit about one of your favorite heroines. Let's keep it focused on women, since we're two women sitting here today. Maybe.
Well, it would have to be Mary McLeod Bethune, who thought that she could start a college and could educate the children of former slaves, and had no money. Mary McLeod Bethune, when she started her college, had $1.50. She was able to get land on what used to be the city dump. And so she had to clear the city dump. She would take orange crates, and that was what they used as desks. And she would burn sticks of wood and use the charred ends of that as a pencil. And so here was a woman just dedicated and just intent on making life better for those who came after her. So she started in 1904 a college in Daytona Beach, which was a training institute for Black girls. And then she merged that college in 1923 with the Cookman Institute, which was for boys. And so it became known as Bethune-Cookman. And Mary McLeod Bethune now represents the state of Florida in Statuary Hall.
That's right.
In Washington, D.C.
Yay!
And so in terms of history, the Florida legislature, which is the only legislature in the nation to vote to be represented in Statuary Hall by a Black female. And we removed the statute of General Edmund Kirby Smith, a Confederate general who was the last to surrender at the end of the Civil War. And he represented Florida as the best that Florida had ever produced. Every state gets 2. And the other statute is of John Gorey, who invented air conditioning.
Allegedly.
Yeah, well, I love air conditioning.
So do I. So do I, ma'am.
So John Gorey now and Mary McLeod Bethune are the 2 statues that we have in Statuary Hall. So I would have to say Dr. Bethune.
Well, I was going to ask you on race relations, where do you think we've improved and where do you think we need improvement? And I think that is kind of a stunning example of Florida replacing the Confederate general with the African American woman who started HBC here in Florida. You know, I don't know if that we could talk. I'm not. There's legislation now that would ban the removal, so I don't know if that would affect things in Washington D.C. or not. But let's just finish up with that last question on race relations.
I think it's remarkable that we have a task force that's supposed to provide a report regarding building a state African American history museum. Now, there is some speculation that this was designed to provide a talking point during a presidential election, and that maybe we produce the report and nothing happens. It sits on a shelf and collects dust. I've devoted 6 months at this point of my life to this task force, and so I'm believing that it's real and that it's going to happen. I'm working with the other 8 members of the task force to build something similar to what we find in Washington, D.C. with the National Museum of African American History, which is just spectacular. And you have to reserve 6 months in advance to even get in there, because the information, people feel denied. That they haven't had this kind of information or exposure. So we have the opportunity here in Florida. Now that there is no presidential race, will it happen? Or was it real, or was it Memorex? So we've got to answer that question.
And where do you think we still need improvement?
Oh, there are a lot of areas where we need improvement. I think when we talk about entrepreneurship, that for a long time, African Americans were taught to get a job. They were trained to get a job and didn't necessarily think about creating a job for themselves and for others. So I think that's an area where we need to focus because it has been shown that if people establish jobs in their communities, they hire people from those communities. They retain people from those communities. So in terms of some of the economic problems, that is a way to address some of that.
Senator Geraldine Thompson, it has been a delight talking with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to celebrate Black History Month with me.
Well, I am so glad I had a chance to bring it home and focus on some of Florida's African American history.
Here at Deeper Dive, we want to hear from you, the listeners. We invite you to send your questions, comments, and feedback to our mailbag. You can reach us at deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. That's deeperdive@cityandstatefl.com. Get your 2 cents in by sending us an email.
Welcome back to A Deeper Dive with Dara. I am really excited today because I am not in the terracotta room. I am on the 13th floor of the Florida Capitol building, and I am sitting across the desk from State Representative Michele Rayner. Welcome to A Deeper Dive.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is great. This is our first, this is my first solo effort with all the gear and everything. So
I'm honored. Hopefully I'll make it worth your time.
It was worth it just sitting here. And I'm looking in at your some of the artwork on your walls, and I know this is a very famous photograph, and I want to say, is it Shirley
Carrie Meek?
I should know Carrie Meek. Her son,
yes,
Kendrick, is a friend of mine. Yes, Carrie Meek. Some Florida Black history right there, wearing a T-shirt saying "A woman's place is in the House and the Senate." And of course, Carrie Meek was a trailblazer in both the House and the Senate
Yes.
in Florida. So that's good way for me to stumble into welcoming you to the show for part 2 of our first episode celebrating Black History Month.
Yes. Love it.
So I spoke during the first half of the episode with Senator Geraldine Thompson, and she had some really great stories that she shared with me. You're in a different generation. So what does Black History Month mean to you as an attorney and a House member in 2024?
Wow. So that's a loaded question. We're going to jump right in.
Oh, no. Did you want a softer?
No. I think it's a loaded question and a very important question because of...
That's why we're doing it.
Right, because of where we find ourselves in the legislature when it comes to anything Black history. The word woke has become almost like, to me, a racial slur when we know that woke actually meant in the 1930s, 1940s, in the Jim Crow era, African Americans, Black folks would tell each other, stay woke, hey, there's danger, be aware of what's going on. And that Black history has really been weaponized in a way that I haven't seen in my lifetime. I'm a young 42. And
very young.
And so for me, leaning into my culture, my heritage, my history, my Blackness, my queerness, me being a woman, all of that is really important to uplift. And I think it's not only important for me personally, but it's important for folks in the community to see that we're not shying away from uplifting the contributions of African American history, and not only that, there's so much more history that's not just the enslavement of Black folks, but also what we did and how we persevered during slavery, what happened after, what is and what's occurring now. That all of this history of Black folks and all of our intersectional identities has added to the deep history and tapestry of this country and of this nation, and especially the state.
Very well said. And I mean, some of the things that Senator Thompson and I were talking about are things that happened before you were born, or right around, maybe not long after you were born. Your family has a number of trailblazers, and you're part of a family of, you have a legacy of community service, public service, politics. What drove you to want to be in the legislature at this kind of it's a critical moment in history, the way that you just set it up?
Yeah. I ask myself that daily. I grew up with parents, so for just situational awareness, one, my mother was part of the USF 8, part of the group of 8 students that integrated the University of South Florida. And then my father was one of the first Black engineers at Honeywell, the first Black engineers who earned Engineer of the Year. My other uncle was the secretary for the Department of Corrections, the first Black secretary for the Department of Corrections under Lawton Childs. I had another uncle that served in the legislature. And my mom's sister, she was one of the first Black nurses and Black midwives down at Jackson Memorial in Miami.
Wow.
So it is. And all of these people came from, especially on my mother's side, came from a shotgun house, right, in Tarpon Springs.
Right.
Their parents had 6th and 8th grade educations. Both of my grandmothers on the maternal and paternal side, cleaned houses for white people. My grandmother on the paternal side, my dad's mom, she was one of the first Black women in Pinellas County to own property, not just one piece, but multiple properties that she was able to give to her children. So there's a deep history that my family has. And so with that, my parents always said, to whom much is given, much is required. Basically, you're not just here for yourself, for your own self-benefit, your own self-grandizement. But, Dr. King always asks, the most urgent question is, what are we doing to help others? What are we doing to serve others? And so, that has always kind of been, the overarching theme of my life. And my mother was one of the first Black social workers in St. Pete. So when I decided I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, she said, don't become a social worker. And I said, okay. And I became a lawyer, and then I became an assistant public defender. So
you're essentially, you're a highly paid social worker.
Right. And, but I look at the service in the legislature and as an extension of the work that I do as a lawyer. When I ran, it was at the suggestion of my dear friend and law partner and brother, Ben Crump.
I know Ben.
Yes, and of course, if you know Ben, when he asks you something, it's more of like a voluntold
right.
versus like, hey, do you think this is a good idea?
Yeah.
And it was March, I think we announced March 9th, 2020. And 2 weeks later, the pandemic happened.
Right.
And then we found out about Ahmaud Arbery. We found out about Breonna
right.
Taylor. And then we found out about George Floyd happened. So all of the work that I had done up until that point as an attorney, as someone who was just very active in my community, I was able to meet a moment that I didn't really expect. I just wanted to help people, and I wanted to figure out what was the best way. And I looked kind of back at my family's, history, and that's what we've always done. We didn't worry about money. We didn't worry about all those things. We knew that if we were doing the right thing, those things would come.
I was going to ask you about your mother, and she passed away recently. And I saw that you had posted on social media about how she was affected by Jim Crow policies, mm-hmm. and also about what a trailblazer she was. And so I love when people tell me stories that fit into my questions. But, I guess the question is, what do you see as your mother's legacy, and what did you learn through her experiences? What did she teach you through her experiences?
Oh, so you're gonna make me cry on Valentine's Day.
Oh, girl, I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
We're honoring her.
Yeah. I learned a lot from my mom. We were a lot alike, so sometimes we got into it a little bit. But she was my best friend, and I learned how to be principled. I learned how to stand up for myself. I learned how to give grace even when it wasn't warranted. I learned how to be a fierce defender of what is right. I think her legacy is the Black students, specifically the Black women that have graduated from USF and continue to matriculate there. I think her legacy in Pinellas and Hillsborough counties are the Black women and women social workers that specifically work with folks who have mental health challenges, and I think that, often people say, oh, Michele, you're her legacy. I don't think I'm quite there yet. There's a saying that we say, I am because we are. And I say this a lot in reference to my mom. I am because she was, mm-hmm. and a lot of us. And I have a picture with her and Ben Crump, and he would call her, and other folks would call her and get advice or prayer. Mm. And people who are giants, who we consider giants. And she was always so okay with not having to be in the spotlight, but yet she should have been, right?
Right.
And so I think that there's a lot to be said of her and her impact, just not only that is felt through the folks that came after her, but those who are closest to her.
Well, that was a wonderful tribute to your mother. Thank you for sharing that with us here on Valentine's Day.
Asking. On Love Day.
Yeah. You mentioned that your mother was one of the first, was part of the USF aid.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're seeing, and you hit on some of what we're confronted with today, and you've spoken out on the floor about these measures that have changed the way or restricted the way that Black history and racism can be taught in schools and in higher education. I'm wondering what you think, if you had any conversations with your mother about that, or what your thoughts are about that today as we are commemorating Black History Month this month.
Listen, so my mother was incredibly opinionated, watched the Florida Channel until, she passed. I came from parents, specifically my mom, when my friends were outside on Saturday mornings, like playing, or they're watching their Saturday mornings cartoons. I was watching Eyes on the Prize. I was watching civil rights documentaries, Civil War documentaries, any documentary on Black history, because my mother was super clear, like, you are going to know where you came from. You are going to know the importance of being Black, and Black is beautiful, and understanding where we have come from and where we're going. And so she was highly opinionated on it. She fiercely disagreed with a lot of these policies, because if you forget history, if you erase history, and our Jewish brothers and sisters often talk about this, that when you forget, you are doomed to repeat it. And I think for us, it is super important to not forget not only the horrors of slavery in the Jim Crow South, but then how our people were able to triumph over it. And we're standing on the shoulders of not only whether it's, the person that was able to overcome Jim Crow atrocities, or if you're thinking about someone like Shirley Chisholm or Carrie Meek, or even living history like Arthenia Joyner, or, all of those things, or living history that's right across in the Senate of Geraldine Thompson, who's such a gift. So you can't completely tell our stories if you don't tell all of our stories. And we can't learn from it and uplift it if you don't tell the complete story of Black folks in America and Black folks in Florida.
What if I asked Senator Thompson, in addition to her own experiences, personal experiences, if she could share, one Black History Month lesson. She spoke about Mary Bethune-Cookman, which was a great, really, and how Senator Thompson is. She can tell a story.
Oh my gosh.
She's a storyteller.
She's phenomenal.
Yeah. Because I have actually seen her do her storytelling on the Senate floor back on her first go-round.
Oh, wow. Yes. One of my greatest privileges was to sit behind her my first 2 years in the Florida House.
Right.
And so when she would get up to speak, I would be like, shh. Everyone, please.
Right. Pay attention.
Right. We're about to learn something.
Right. So what lesson would you share for young people or anyone who's listening today? What's your Black History Month lesson?
Ooh, that's a good question. So normally I would always invoke a Black woman, but as I am looking at this picture of Malcolm X that I have right here, who is one of my greatest heroes. One, I think he teaches us that you always have the ability to change your life. Where you start is not where you have to end, because we know that he started off in a lot of trouble, being in a life of crime, going to prison. He came out and he devoted himself to the service of his people. And even in the service of his people, he evolved. And I think for me, knowing his story, knowing how he was fiercely devoted, and by the way, as an aside, Malcolm X was my mother's favorite as well. So I'm sure she's probably up in heaven, being like, Brother Malcolm, let me talk to you. being fiercely devoted to your people, and not just Black folks, but to the people, and being unapologetic, you can never go wrong. So I think my Black history moment would be really just the life of Malcolm X, the life of his incredible wife, Betty Shabazz, and then I think people should read his autobiography.
Okay, well, I did not expect you to go there. I thought it would be your mother, but we did already devote quite a bit of time to your mother. There's one thing that I've thought about covering. I've been covering minority issues in the Florida legislature for a very long time, and it seems to me like there's at some point at which, a bunch of white men, and for that extent, maybe possibly even a little white half Jewish lady like me, will never understand the experience of being a Black person walking down the street. And, there's it seems as more time passes, like there seems to be less understanding of that now. I'm not sure really what the question is, except, the walk a mile in my shoes kind of a thing, that is there a way that that your fellow lawmakers will ever get it, what it's like to be a Black person in 2024 in Florida right now?
They will never get it because they will never be, right? But just because you will never be doesn't mean that you don't make the intentional decision to try to understand, and not just try to understand, then act on the things that the most impacted people are telling you that's impacting them. For a perfect example, I often say in committee on the House floor, when we have people from the community, from the public come to us, and they're overwhelming telling us, stop doing this. These are the people that are closest to the issues that are telling us to stop doing this. You have a decision to make at that point. Do I listen? Do I shut up and listen? Because clearly these are the people that are telling me, when you do this, I'm impacted this way. And do I seek to understand, or do I just move through with arrogance and pride and say, I know better than you, and I'm going to move forward? And if you choose the latter, I would say that is a form of white supremacy. That's a form of patriarchy. That's a form of really paternalism. And for me, the problem becomes, don't give me lip service. And Senator Thompson often uses this James Baldwin quote, and I'm going to use it again. I can't hear what you say because I see what you do. And so for me, don't come to me and say, oh, I get it, Rep. Rayner, a Black queer woman, I get it. No, because if you got it, and I'm telling you and then providing you data, not just of my lived experience, but evidentiary data of how your policies or how what you're thinking will impact people like me, and you're choosing not to take it into thoughtful and serious consideration and maybe change your policy, I can't hear what you say because I see what you do. So I think for me, it's not, they will never get it because they will never be, but they will never get it because they're not also taking the opportunity to not only listen, but then to act.
Was that a stupid question?
No, it wasn't a stupid question. I think it's a very important question for folks who may be listening, who are, who are white or lighter skinned brothers, who are, I think that it is, I say lighter skinned brothers, sisters, as Cornel West would say, but who are white folks, period.
Right.
Who may be thinking about that, or who may not even be realizing how their actions can be harmful. So I think that is not, there's very rarely a stupid question. I won't say there's never a stupid question, but that was most certainly not one.
Well, I just want to end up. Thank you again for
course.
spending time with us today. I liked. And now I've started since I've been doing the podcast. I like refer to myself in the royal we. I don't know.
I love it though because it is us. Because people are listening, so it is us. Yes.
Well, thank you for joining us today, allowing me to come into your lovely office here with all this
I have
fabulous
to make it happy
artwork.
and bright.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
and very black when you come in. It's very black. A lot of black art up here.
I love it. I love it. I just wanted to finish up by saying you're a civil rights lawyer,
Yes.
and we talked about your family legacy that you inherited. So, what legacy do you hope to leave for the next generations? It's a heavy question
That
to
is a heavy
end on.
question. I think I'm still building that.
Yeah.
I am obviously one of being a kind human, one of being fiercely devoted to my friends, my chosen family, because as I shared with you, when my parents died, it's just me. I think I always often say this, I know it's cliche, but just leaving this space a little bit better than I found it.
I love that. I don't feel like that's a cliche at all.
Thank you. That's really the legacy, and however that looks, but that's really what I want.
Well, thank you again. We can dish about the elevators another time.
Oh my gosh, I thought I was gonna get stuck and about to start scream for my aid, and I was like, there's nothing that this person can do to get me off of this elevator right now if I get stuck. So yeah, thank God I didn't.
Well, thank you for joining Deeper Dive with me today, Michele Rayner, State Representative from St. Petersburg.
Yes, thank you.
A Deeper Dive with Dara is hosted by Dara Cam, produced by Ryan Daly, and music for the podcast was recorded by Periodic Labs, LLC, and performed by Ryan Daly and Danny Reyes.